On behalf of the Louisiana Center for the Book in the State Library of Louisiana, thank you for joining us for this virtual 2021 Louisiana Book Festival presentation. This program is From the Jasmine Fields of France to the Bayous of Louisiana, When Place Informs Plot, with David Armand, Pamela Binnings Ewen, Ann L. Simon, and Erin Z. Bass. David Armand is an assistant professor of creative writing at Southeastern Louisiana University. In 2010, he won the George Garrett Fiction Prize for his first novel, The Pugilist's Wife, which was published by Texas Review Press. He has since published 2 more novels, 2 collections of poetry, and a memoir. His 7th book is The Lord's Acre. He is currently working on a collection of essays. Pamela Binnings Ewen is a former lawyer and the author of 1 nonfiction book and 6 novels, including The Moon and the Mango Tree, awarded the 2012 Eudora Welty Memorial Award by the National League of American Pen Women. Her newest book, The Queen of Paris, a novel of Coco Chanel, reveals Chanel's secret life during the Nazi occupation of Paris in World War II. Ewen lives in Mandeville, Louisiana. Visit her at PamelaEwen.com. Ann L. Simon was educated at Wellesley College and Yale and Louisiana State University Law Schools, and is a retired Louisiana General Jurisdiction Trial Court judge. She is the author of Blood in the Cane Field, Blood in the Lake, and Blood of the Believers, crime novels based upon her experiences. A resident of Lafayette, Louisiana, Erin Z. Bass has 20 years of writing experience. She has worked as a staff writer for the Times of Acadiana and Independent Weekly in Lafayette. She founded Deep South Magazine, deepsouthmag.com, in 2009 and has been reviewing books and interviewing authors since. Her passion is Southern literature. Ladies and gentlemen, David Armand, Pamela Binnings Ewen, Ann Simon, and Erin Bass.
It's nice to see you all, even though we're not in person. And so I kind of wanted to start the panel since our theme is place and setting. I wanted to start by asking you to just tell us about the overall setting of your book. Do you want to go first, David?
Sure. So my book, The Lord's Acre, it's set in Angie, Louisiana, which is a real place. Kind of north of where I grew up in Folsom. Small little town. It might even be a village, not even qualified as a town. And it takes place sort of like on a compound, I guess you could call it, where this guy who's like a preacher has sort of cleared some land and put some old school buses out there, and people live there. And so I don't necessarily like to use the word cult, but it's, I guess, what people on the outside of it would call it. But that's where it's set. And in fact, all my books are set a similar location in Louisiana.
Yeah. Okay, Pam, do you want to go next?
Sure. My book is about Coco Chanel during the 4 years of Nazi occupation in World War II in France. So it opens, the setting begins with Coco on the Riviera, just sort of musing. She's in Cannes, and she's thinking of this fake war, this phony war, and irritated by it. But the real setting, and that's just sort of the introductory setting, the real setting is Paris, of course. Paris was declared, believe it or not, an open city in France. When the Germans got to the French border and they realized that they were really going to be fighting, the entire government fled to Bordeaux, and Paris was declared an open city, and no one was going to be there to defend it. So the Germans just marched right in. They took over the Hotel Ritz, and Coco lived with them there for 5 years. So the basic setting, the major part of the setting is in Paris, a lot of it in the Hotel Ritz, where she's living with the Gestapo, the head of the Gestapo, and many of the avoir, many of the highest ranking people in the German army.
Okay, Anne?
The Year of Yellow Jack is set in 1939 in New Iberia, but it wasn't New Iberia yet. It was the Tesh country, and the area around there. The very first settlers some of the very first settlers were the Duperriers, and this is the story of a slave of the Duperriers who nursed the town during the outbreak of the yellow fever epidemic that ravaged the town at that time. The setting is extremely important because it determines the story. It's such a different time. 50 years later, it would have been very different. But then, of course, there were no roads. You traveled by bayou. So everything about the story is controlled by the setting at that time. And I had to find that setting out of history and lore of the town.
Okay, yeah, that's fascinating. Well, my next question is, what came first when you got the idea for your book? Was it the place? Was it a certain event? Was it a character? Or was it something else? David, you want to go again?
Sure. So mine's kind of interesting. So every book I've written, it's always come from an image, like I don't know where those images come from, but like this image that pops into my head. And for this particular book, oddly, the image that inspired the book didn't wind up in the final draft. So the image that I had was a man whipping a child with a belt. When I was a kid, my grandparents or my grandfather, that's how you get punished. They take their belt or they threaten you with it, but sometimes you'd actually get spanked with it. And so like with all my other ideas or whatever, I ask a question after I have that picture in my head. I say, well, why would he be doing this? Why would he be whipping this child? Who is the child? Is it his child? Is it somebody else's kid? And so these questions develop. And then as I start answering the questions, that's how the plot unfolds. And so somehow the answer was it's a preacher, and he's whipping a kid who disobeyed one of the rules of the church. And then I started thinking, well, what type of church would do something like that? And then at the time I was really interested in cults, and I was reading about Jonestown, and I've always been kind of fascinated by that whole part of our society and our culture, and what makes people join cults and get caught up in that. And so that's how it started with that. But what's interesting is later on, as I was writing the novel and as I edited it and changed it up, that scene was omitted from the book, and it didn't end up in there. But that's how it sort of started, was with that picture.
Okay. Yeah, I find that a lot of authors say that. I'm curious to hear if Pam or Anne is going to say the same thing. But what about you, Pam? Where did your idea come from?
My husband gave me a book to read. He said, you might be interested in this. And it's called Sleeping with the Enemy. This is a nonfiction book as opposed to the movie that had that same name. Excuse me. And it was, I was caught just jaw-dropping, stunned about a third of the way into the book when I saw actual copies that had just recently been released about 7 years ago, military files on Coco Chanel during World War II. And a lot of people, most people know that she was friendly with them and was probably a collaborator. This went much further than that. These documents prove that she was not only a spy, but she had a spy number with the avoir. She had a code name, Westminster, and she actually went on several missions for them, spying. In the middle of the war, she went to Germany, to Berlin, to meet Schellenberg, who was the third person down in the entire Gestapo. And she did work with Schellenberg, and she went to Spain on 2 missions. It was just jaw-dropping. I couldn't believe it. And so that the whole entire book is centered around her behavior and the choices, the strange, odd choices that she made during that war, and why did she make them? And in fact, it was a matter of survival for her. But it was fascinating, and I knew I had to write the book right then.
Okay, great. Anne, what about you?
Mine began trying to solve the secret of Felicity. Felicity is a legend in New Iberia. There are those who say she was a slave, others say no, she wasn't. And the African Americans here have an organization dedicated to her memory. She was a hero for sure, but there were some things about her that were extremely unusual in that she's buried in the Duperrier family plot. The Duperriers were founding members of this community, which is very unusual to have a slave buried with the white family that she was a slave to. So I am, as Patricia is, I'm a former lawyer. I'm a judge who retired and began writing crime novels when they forced me to retire, actually. So I knew my way around courthouses, and I began digging for records to see if I could find anything concrete about Felicity. And this was a time when the parishes were not set, the boundaries were not set. So I had quite a few courthouses to go to. I finally found Felicity in somebody's family record of slaves in St. Mary Parish, down in the basement in some crumbling old documents. And
Oh, internet for you. That was.
no, there's no internet to find what I needed, but I did find Felicity, and I took off from that and traced those families around in both Iberia, in all Iberia, St. Martin, and St. Mary as they exist today, because people recorded things anywhere they might want to record them. And it is historical fiction in that I created a life for Felicity, but it is it's consistent with what the historians know. And I was blessed with a good friend who's a descendant of that family, who has in the back of her garage a huge file of all the family papers. They seem to send them to her. And I started through those and tried to find any reference to Felicity that I could find. So both the documents and these old letters that the family has kept, I think I created what Felicity was. And she was a courageous woman, and her owner was a courageous woman, and the two of them stepped out of their usual roles, one as a matron, a widow in New Iberia, and one as a slave, to do something quite courageous and successful, which is nursing the town through the yellow fever epidemic using traditional Haitian methods rather than what the doctors were doing, which was bleeding people at that time, and they were dying like flies. So it started with to find a character, to bring a character to life.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad you told that story, Anne. Okay, so our next question is going to kind of go off of what you've been talking about, Anne, because it's about research. So both your and Pam's novels are historical fiction, and David, I feel like your preacher, could have been taken from history, and it sounds like you did do some research into cults. So I'm just curious about the type and how much research you all did, and kind of how much time you spent on that period while working on your book. So, and do you want to, how long was your research period? Because you were researching a person and then probably also the epidemic and.
It probably took me about 3 years.
Wow.
I did find an academic nurse who was in my class in college, who then went on to become a nurse. And she referred me to someone who was an expert in nursing in the 19th century in Louisiana. And so I researched that also, what was believable that the doctors were doing, and that someone who used traditional methods might be doing. There was just lots and lots of research to do. Yes.
I bet. Yeah. Well, Pam, what about you? Did you get to go to Paris for this book?
I've been to Paris before, so it was in my mind, yes. But I do a tremendous amount of research too, like both of you all do, I'm sure. It took me about 3 years, the research. And what I do is I want to build the personality from the research. It's really a lot of fun. So I read every single thing that I could find on Coco Chanel, both good and bad. But also, because it was World War II, I had to do a tremendous amount of, I knew that it had to be right. I knew I couldn't have any fluff in there. Everything had to be really precise. And so I sort of created the world, which was only just those 4 years for Coco during the war, and framed it in the war so that everything had to be timed precisely what she was doing. And actually, through my research, I was able to create a timeline through those 4 years for where she was, because it was a complicated story. She was also suing her partner, who happened to be Jewish, and she was very, very anti-Semitic, and she was suing him in France using the German laws prohibiting Jews from owning property and working. So she was doing that at the same time that she was going on these missions for Schellenberg. So I not only had to research her, but I researched all the characters. I had to build a sort of, as you were saying, Anne, you just build a world, and the world is centered around your main character, but everything in the world has, and in my case, it's framed by the war, but everything in that world has to be as real as your hero, my heroine was. Then if I want to bring things in, her thought processes, or when she makes the choice, why did she make it? And it goes maybe back to her childhood. I did use flashback chapters, but very short. I tried to keep them as precise as I could, and I did as much research as I could, but I wanted them to be very short and not intrusive, not intrude on the line of the story. So it took me at least 3 years to research it. And then I continue, of course, when I'm writing.
Yeah, I bet. You probably did a lot of fact checking too.
Yes, I really had to, because of the war, and because she was such a well-known figure.
Yeah. Right. Well, David, I think I read that you actually talked to some former cult members for your book.
No, not I didn't. Well, it's not that I know of. I mean, I'm sure I know people who may not like openly admit to being in, but I know, I mean, obviously here in Louisiana, I mean, there's a lot of fundamentalism, and of course, not all of it's bad. I mean, there's a lot of, really great churches and great people, but I've also known people who've been sort of traumatized by their religious upbringings, and so I guess for me, it wasn't necessarily research in the traditional sense, but I think I was always interested, for whatever reason, when I was even real young. I remember I was probably about like 14 or 15, and I bought the book Helter Skelter about the Manson, and I'm sure my parents thought they were a little bit concerned. I don't know, many kids that age who want to read about that thing, but I was interested in it, and and always had been. So, I mean, even I could say back then I was kind of researching, even though I had no idea I'd ever write a book about that. But what interested me more as I got older, so, I started reading, there are these two books that came out within the past 10 years by this guy named Jeff Gwynne. One was about Charles Manson, and then right after that, he came out with one about Jim Jones, who, the Jonestown Massacre. And they were just incredible books. But what I always wanted to see was more of the perspective of the people who were part of the cult, not the leader. Like you always see Charles Manson, you always see Jim Jones, you always see David Koresh, and you don't hear enough about the people who got involved. And when you do, it's often like, well, they were just so gullible, like, why would anybody fall for that? But having grown up here and having known people and groups that could be considered cults, so maybe I have actually talked to people who are cult members, but again, like, not everybody wants to say, hey, I'm a cult member,
No.
But I think that was sort of my way into it, was just trying to figure out, because it doesn't just happen overnight. There's a process, and not, I mean, this can be misinterpreted, but I'll just say it. Not all cult members or cult leaders are evil people. Sometimes they start off with good intentions. I mean, I don't know if I could say that about Charles Manson, but Jim Jones certainly, or David Koresh certainly. I don't think they started off thinking, I'm going to be responsible for all these people's losing their lives, and I was interested in all that complicated aspects of what that entails. And I also really like the idea, and I had finished my book, but not long after that, I saw Quentin Tarantino's movie, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is kind of billed as being about the Manson family murders. And Charles Manson's character has about 30 seconds of screen time on that movie. And I thought that's a really cool way to, because you get sick of seeing Charles Manson's face, like, and it's like, well, what about everybody else? And that's kind of what I try to do in my book. Is focus more on and humanize them, and make them sympathetic characters.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. I'm glad you mentioned the movie. I like the spin that he put on that story.
Yeah.
I was gonna have to walk out at the end, but I didn't.
Yeah.
Could I ask a quick question?
Sure.
David, did you find a thread that explained it all, the psychology of why people go into cults? I know that's a long question, but
no, it's not. I mean, well, the simplest thing, I mean, because of course, it's such a complicated, complex thing, but from all the people I know who have gotten into situations that could potentially have become cult-like situations, it always kind of boils down to people just searching for meaning in their lives, and sometimes people find that in churches, people find that in philosophy, people find it in art or music, but there's some people that have this kind of insatiable need to know the truth, and occasionally those people sometimes are maybe abused, or maybe they've been hurt in some way, and then they find this charismatic person who makes them feel okay about themselves. And and I think, again, like I like these cult leaders like Jim Jones. I mean, the book that I read about him traced all the way back to his childhood, and even as a kid he wanted to be a preacher, but I don't think he thought, of course, as a kid, I'm going to be responsible for 1,400 people committing suicide, but and I don't think even in the beginning of his church he thought he wanted to, but it just turned into that, this sort of power that he had. And but I would say, that the common thread is always just this need for truth, or this need for meaning, and somehow that gets tied into needing to belong, to something, to say, I'm a part of this group, or whatever it is.
Fascinating.
Yeah. Well, Anne, I'm curious if your story changed the way that you see New Iberia at all, especially, since we've been in the midst of a pandemic for the past 2 years, and there's a lot of parallels to yellow fever. So, how do you see New Iberia and your community after working on this book?
I want to congratulate you on that question because I've been on a lot of interviews and no one has ever asked anything like that. I
Oh,
find that a very interesting question.
oh.
Well, New Iberia is kind of in the throes of a movement to tell the other side of the story, namely the half of the people who were around then who were slaves and who do not fall into any of the history of the town.
Mm.
And so I skirted around that issue constantly, and I'm still engaged in that pursuit of telling the other side of the story. And so writing the book did change my view of New Iberia in that I learned so much about the untold stories. Particularly, we have an African American Historical Society here that is very active and is encouraging people of color to seek their roots. And they, of course, they had the same problems doing their work as I had doing mine. So I feel a bond with them as they start seeking their stories, and I was seeking Felicity's. I made a conscious choice not to speak in Felicity's voice. And actually, one of the readers of my book for UL said she wished I had had Felicity speaking. I purposely did not, because I think today it is very difficult to cross cultures. And I know that the group in New Iberia, the African American Society, they really don't want people from another culture telling their pain.
Mm.
So she is a sort of a shadowy figure. You only know her from what everyone else, you know her from what she does, you know her from what everyone else did with her, and you know her from her courage to step forth and do the things she did. You don't hear her speak. But what did I learn about New Iberia? Lots, because it introduced me to this entire movement around here to tell the other part of the story.
And did Felicity get her own historical marker recently?
She has a historical marker here. Yes, that was put up. There has been a society all along that is dedicated to her memory. And that's an interesting thing too, because when I spoke with the members of that society, they knew nothing about the historical facts that I've managed to get out. And some of their stories didn't jive with some of their other stories, but they were excited about it, and they still are excited about getting some facts about it. I didn't have enough facts to really write history. It had to be historical fiction because there just isn't any there. Of course, the slaves were illiterate. There was no records kept of them. So, there's no way to get real history. The only way to do it was historical fiction.
Right. Well, good. Thanks for answering that question.
Thanks for asking it.
Sure. Well, I'll reveal my mom's from New Iberia, so I spent a lot of time there.
Oh, okay.
A lot of my family's from there too, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Pardon? What did
I was just saying a lot of my family's from there also. It's a beautiful, beautiful town.
And it's unique in that people who don't leave here. I mean, you can talk to descendants of all of these people that I wrote about. You can talk to their descendants and they all have their stories, very much unlike where I came from, because I came from the East. This was a treasure of lore.
Yeah.
Well, David, you also live in the place that you write about, and you set all of your books in Louisiana, and I think pretty much the area that you live in. So, what is it about the backwoods and the gorges and the bayous of Louisiana that make for such a great setting for a story?
It's funny because, when I first started writing when I was younger, as a kid, just making up little stories and stuff, I thought that they had to be about big places, like places everybody knew, like New York or something, um, and I wasn't exposed to literature really that took place here. And when I was in high school, I had this great teacher who gave me all these books by Walker Percy. And then I found out that he lived like not far from Covington High, where I went to school. And I was just like amazed by that. I thought, wow, like a real writer lives here. And then, so I saw where his house was. And then I went to he had a little bookstore in downtown Covington. And I just thought that was incredible. And so then when I started taking classes in college, writing classes, I studied with Tim Gautreaux. And he told me, I mean, it's like the best advice I ever got, or not really even advice, just like permission to write about Folsom. Like I thought that's where I grew up, this little one red light town. And I thought, well, who would care about that place? Who would care about Franklinton or Angie or all these places and he said, if you write about it, it's going to be authentic and you can, well, it was Eudora Welty who said something about, taking, well, I'm just going to totally misquote it, but basically saying, taking the particular and making it universal when talking about place. And essentially, and then as the more I read, the more I discovered about writing, and I would read a lot of Faulkner and see that there was this like gigantic fan base in Japan for William Faulkner. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. I mean, because he's writing about Oxford, Mississippi, this real small southern town, and but people across the world can relate to it. And so then I just started writing all my stories and taking place because it was so easy because I knew it so well. And I think, like even the story about the cult, like that could take place anywhere, and they have, obviously. I mean, the Jim Jones, he was in California, David Koresh was in Texas, and I mean, like human emotions are universal, whether it's in Paris, France, or New Iberia, or Folsom, Louisiana. And I think it was Anne who was saying something about the place being sort of a character itself in the story. Or maybe Pam, one of y'all said it, and I was thinking, yeah, I think of place that same way, is because it has such an influence on what the people do or don't do, or how they act or react. And so to me, that was just like, I feel like, like Faulkner said, to quote him or misquote somebody else, something like, I could never exhaust the possibilities of Oxford, Mississippi. I'll write about my little postage stamp of the world, and never be able to run out of space to do it. And I feel like that too. I can't imagine writing about any other place. So yeah.
Well, look at To Kill a Mockingbird. How small is that little town? And look at that.
I know. And that book, the same thing, it's read all over the world, and people, because of the themes, and it's
right.
Yeah. And I guess the trick is just not like, I think some people I was on a panel yesterday, in one of the authors grew up in, well, I'll just say Lafayette. It was around there. I'm already forgetting the name of the town, but how sometimes it can be misrepresented in culture, in like popular culture, like the Cajun accent and all that stuff, that we don't really sound like that, like they show in Hollywood. But when it's authentic, I think it's very, people can tell and they appreciate it.
Yeah. Pam, did you find it more difficult to write about a place so far away?
No, it's an odd thing, but when I do research, it's in my head, and it's in my head all the time, and it's a real world. It's really really alive. When one of my first books, The Moon and the Mango Tree, is about my grandparents in Siam in the 1920s, and it was historical fiction. Well, there was no way to research today. I mean, today Thailand is so different from Siam in the 1920s, and there are no records, and of course I didn't speak the language, but I was able, through the people and my grandparents' letters and things like that, to build the world. And that's what I always do. I think in all my books, it's like a whole world. And as you research each person or each issue or each little thing that you're looking for, it sort of brings the world more, it makes it more complete for you, but you never really get out of it. And it's not like I'm going to figure out what this looks like, and I'm going to figure out where where this goes and where that goes. It's really more just like walking around in another world, for me anyway.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
It is. It's really a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, what are you working on next, Pam?
Me?
Yeah.
I'm working on a book connected to Coco and the Queen of Paris. It's due in March. So my heart breaks because I won't be eligible, I guess, for the festival next year, because I won't have a new book, in that year. But it's long and it's complicated. It's about a person who was a minor character in the Queen of Paris. And when I started it, I thought, well, this is going to be fun and kind of easy. It won't be as complicated as Coco was. Well, it's 10 times more complicated. Because it's about the world of the courtesans, and it's very, very precise. In fact, I had to get an assistant in France, because the only books that have been written about this woman, although she was very well known and famous, the only books that have been written are in French. And I've studied French for 10 years, but when I try to speak it, French people scream and run. So I know, I'm not capable of reading a book. So I had to hire somebody, and she's translating these books for me. It's a lot of fun because I'll get 10 pages, maybe once a week. And it's like opening it up and it's like, oh, wow, look at this. But the problem with it is she was so complicated that when I get those 10 pages, it invalidates maybe 50 of the pages right before it, because she had so much going on at the same time. She had so many things going on. So one thing I decided to do, are the people that are watching, that are writers, might be interested in this. One thing I decided to do was just kill off some of the complications. And I did that a little bit in the Queen of Paris, where you find that, yes, this is what happened, and this is the way it happened, but it's a rabbit trail, and it deflects from what you're really trying to say. And so I just kill them off. I kill them off right and left.
Hey, that's some great advice.
Yeah. You can do it in historical fiction if you do it right.
Yeah. Okay. Anne, are you working on something else?
Oh, yes. How did I get through the COVID is another book. And in this one, it's a different period. I know Western Massachusetts well, and they have Acadians.
Yeah.
And so I have an Acadian speaking Union soldier who comes down here with the 52nd Regiment and travels through the Bayou country. That is fact. And I have there are books about the letters that regiment wrote back home. And the reason for doing this is he speaks French, and I was fascinated by the fact that French-speaking slaves in St. Martin Parish who followed the Union soldiers could not speak to the Union soldiers. So I have one Union soldier who is able to speak with them, and that gives him insight into their thinking. You see, I'm still trying to work on what they really thought about all that was happening. And it's very difficult, but this is my new device to do it, is to have a French-speaking Union soldier get a window onto their world this way. So it's set, of course, in 1863, when the regiment from the north came down and spent 9 months in the Bayou country. And I'm about 3/4 of the way through it. And unlike Pamela, instead of lopping off a character, I had to add one and go all the way back to the beginning and make him more important from the very beginning.
I could have given you some.
6
I could
months.
have given you some.
Because I wanted to kill him off. So I wanted him to be important, and I had to make him go all the way back to Massachusetts and come to. So anyway, this is not my first work, my first trade. And so I'm blessed with a very good friend, actually, that you know, David, is Ann Dobie, is a very close friend of mine. And she's been one of my mentors. And I have a daughter-in-law who teaches English to elementary schools. And they both know me well enough to tell me what they think. And they're very blunt. And thank goodness, because they tell me this is garbage, you've messed this up. And so anyway, I've learned a lot from them, and I'm blessed to have them help me along the way. But I'm fascinated with this new period of history that I have now to look at.
Yeah, that does sound fascinating. Well, David, what about you?
So I have, I think like all of us probably are the same way. It's, for lack of a better word, our obsessions, with history and with people and characters. And so we're always writing. It sounds like everybody has projects going, and so me too. I have, in fact, and at my book next year that's coming out, UL Press is publishing. It's a memoir. I had written a memoir that came out a few years ago, and this is another one that I never knew that I would write, because I'll just say this succinctly as possible. But so I was adopted, and my whole life I thought I knew who my biological mother was. She didn't raise me, but I knew who she was, and I thought I knew who my biological father was. Because everyone in my family told me it was this guy. She wasn't married to him or anything, but that's what I thought. And so one day I took a DNA test and put it on Ancestry, just to see who, what people do. And about a year or so after I had done that, someone popped up on there who I had never heard of before. And it said he was my uncle, which was really strange because he wasn't the brother of the guy who I thought was my biological dad. So I started doing all the research, and say what you want about Facebook. I deleted my Facebook a while ago, and then I just reactivated it not too long ago. But thanks to Facebook, I was able to find my biological father, like this guy I didn't know existed. He lives on the other side of the country, lives in Pennsylvania. And he took a DNA, I emailed him. And so imagine getting this email from this 40-year-old guy saying, "Hi, I'm your son," or "I think I'm your son," and it was amazing. And he took the DNA test, and it came back and it said he was my dad. And so I've since met him. And the most amazing thing is, not only do I look exactly like him, because as I was doing research, you were talking about research, I looked at like classmates.com and things like that, and would see these yearbook pictures. And I'll never forget one of them I looked at, and I just couldn't. And so I called my wife to come look at the screen, and she thought it was a picture of me from high school, because that's how much I looked. She just was, it was just like speechless. There's nothing that you can. And so I wrote about of course, everybody said, "Well, you have to write this." Yeah. And so I wrote a memoir that sort of focused on me being adopted and the way I grew up, and then ultimately finding this information out. And I was thrilled because I sent it to Devin and Josh at UL Press, and it was a little over a year ago, I think, by now, but they said they wanted to publish it. So that's coming out next year.
Oh,
So I'm excited about, because it's funny, I've told so many people the story, and I've met so many people when I tell them that story, say, oh my God, I was adopted too. And I found, that's the best thing about writing, even if you're writing fiction, is just connecting with readers. And this is like a real connection to have with people. So I'm excited about this one coming out.
Well, I want to put in a plug there for the editor there, Devin Lord. She is wonderful.
She is.
She, of course, I'm writing, about these French thing, and she knows a lot about slaves. She knows a lot about French. It was a find for me to have her work with her. So,
yeah, I know. I'm looking forward to it. And it's funny too, just on the side of that is I live, right where the hurricane passed over in Hammond, and I had evacuated, and she emailed me to check to see if we were all okay. And I thought, wow, what like editor at a publishing house would email the author to see if they're okay, if they need anything?
She's special.
So that was really cool. Yeah.
Tell her hi.
Oh, I will.
Yeah, we're lucky to have them in Lafayette.
Yeah. I can't wait once all this is, semi over, when we can go and see people again in person, to actually go. I've never, because my other publisher is all the way out in Texas, and I've never been there before. And then I have a publisher in Missouri at a university up there. But I just want to drive out to Lafayette and just go see the way it all looks, where all the books are made and everything. So one of these days, I'm hopefully get to drive out there and do that.
Yeah, and we have a new bookstore now too. So
yeah, I heard about that. Yeah,
to do readings and signings. Yeah,
That's great, because bookstores are disappearing.
Yeah.
You've got a new one, but hold on to it.
Yeah.
I know. I'm supporting it.
Well, New Iberia has an independent bookstore, which is quite amazing.
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
And I think I saw on I think it was the one that Jim Davis sent out the other day. It was like the press release for all this, that said Cavalier House Books is going to be this bookseller for all the books that are part of this festival. And they're a little local bookstore in I think Denham Springs, maybe.
Oh wow.
So that's really cool, because it's like
That's
usually it's like Barnes and Noble or
that's
something.
great.
Yeah, but I love to support the small local bookstores. I mean, there's nothing wrong. Barnes and Noble's great, Books A Million's great, but the small bookstores are the ones that sell your books. They're the ones that say, I read this book, and or if you read this, I know you'll like this. And that's, special, I think. So that's a shout out to Cavalier Books. If they're
All right, we're giving all kind of shout outs.
yeah.
Well, does anybody have anything else they want to say before we wrap up?
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Yeah, pleasure meeting everybody. And
Yeah, I had a lot. It's always fun.
David, I think we've met before.
I think we have, yeah.
But Ann, I haven't met you or Erin, so it's nice meeting you. And I was a lawyer before.
Yes, I saw that in the bio on one of your books on the back of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I wrote my first book while I was still practicing. It took me 15 years because I did it on weekends and on my own time at home. And when it came out, my partner said, wait a minute, where'd you find time to write that book? They were very suspicious.
I didn't write till I retired, but then I was a judge, so I had a lot of capital cases. And so the first thing I wrote 3 crime novels based on capital cases that I had.
Oh, that would be
moving around the characters and giving them, moving them to a different parish, etc. But I knew those stories, so that was easy. It wasn't the research we're talking about for current projects, no.
But it must have been fun.
And they sell. I have to tell you, they said, put blood in the title and it sells.
Another tip.
Yeah.
I sat through a murder trial one time because I wanted to find out one little thing. And I did find it out, but it was so fascinating to watch that whole trial. You must have really enjoyed it.
I did. I liked the work very, very much. They had mandatory retirement, so I had to quit at 70. I had to find a whole nother career.
Yeah.
Oh, we're glad you did. All right. Well, thank y'all so much. This has just been, this has worked out so well. We found so many connections and
Thank you to you.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you, Erin, and all of y'all. Hope to see you. Hope to worm my way in some way next year without a new book, and then I'll see you all next
sure
year.
we can figure something out. Yes.
Okay, good.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you for watching this presentation of the virtual 2021 Louisiana Book Festival. Please visit our official bookseller, Cavalier House Books, and receive 20% off all featured festival titles through the end of the year. A special thank you to our festival sponsors. The Louisiana Book Festival will return on October 29th, 2022.